have any motion and discussion on that?
I move that we approve the minutes as distributed.
Okay, do we have a second? Okay, any discussion, any changes we need to make? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, motion passes. Public comment. Do we have any comments from the public this morning?
Nobody cares.
Okay, seeing none, we'll close the public comment. Of course, public's always welcome to comment on the business as it progresses. So then our next item would be a presentation from the Orlando Utility Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commission members. I have the pleasure today of introducing our presenters from OUC who, upon your request in the last meeting, have agreed certainly to come and talk about their load forecasting technique and the last forecast that they've done. So I want to introduce to you Tom Bell, who's a financial analyst in the strategic planning area, and Lawrence Strawn, who is the retail pricing administrator in strategic planning area. And I'll just caution you folks that these folks are primarily technicians, and they're not in a policy-making position with OUC. So if you have questions about the administration of the OUC contract, these are not the gentlemen that can answer those questions or really respond to your comments. But they certainly are the experts in load forecasting. I think you'll be impressed by the amount of thought and effort that goes into the load forecast that they make for us as well as for themselves. So with that, I'm not sure if you're both going to present or me, Tom. Okay, Tom Bell.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. I'm Tom Bell from Orlando Utilities Commission, and as Mr. Richards pointed out, my colleague Lawrence Strawn is here with us. We're part of the load forecasting team. It's really nice to be here. You have a beautiful community, kind of place that I would like to live, and it's refreshing not to have my nose pressed against a computer screen all day. Let's see if I can figure out how to operate this. Here we go. There are three basic points that I would like to cover today, and I have packed a lot of information into the time we have together. I'd welcome any questions or comments. I can talk to you from how the forecast is prepared and the techniques. I don't know anything about contracts, but I'll talk about the process. I'll talk about the results for the most recent Vero Beach forecast. And then we can take a few minutes and look back at the last 4 years, what the forecasts have been and what's actually occurred. We develop the Vero Beach forecast in the December-January timeframe every year. We follow that with the OUC forecast. Our schedule is a little bit later than yours. We use the same basic techniques, the same modeling techniques for the Vero Beach forecast that we use for the OUC retail forecast. OUC's forecast is currently under internal review, so we're hoping that our commission will approve it without too much concern in August. We forecast customers, the number of customers, the growth in customers. We forecast electric sales to the customer. The electric sales forecast is done at a customer class level, residential, commercial, industrial, and then on a monthly basis, 10 years out into the future. From that, we can derive a net energy for load forecast, the power that's needed to serve those customers. And coming out of the net energy for load forecast is an estimate of the annual peaks.
You said your commission. Who is that? Do you say commission or your board?
We have a utilities commission that we report to, the Orlando Utilities Commission. The mayor serves on our board, and then executives from the community, and they're our governing body. We start the forecast by looking at history. We look at the number of customers and the customer growth over time, the sales to those customers. We also bring in economic data. We get that from Moody's Analytics, the people that do the bond ratings. Also have an analytics division and some pretty good economists, although they've struggled with the recession the same way we all have. We forecast the number of customers. That's much easier than forecasting electrical sales. We can determine a relationship between an economic indicator and the customer growth historically that would lead us to a projection for customers in the future. Residential customers correlate fairly well with the growth in population, while the commercial customer growth correlates pretty well with the number of people who are actually employed. We use economic data that's based on the standard metropolitan statistical area for Vero Beach, Sebastian, which is essentially Indian River County. The picture that you see here is the number of customers over time against the SMSA population over time. The red line is customers and aligns with the axis on the left. The blue line is population and aligns with the customers on the right. They parallel out pretty well. You can see that the population growth is just a little bit stronger than the customer growth, as we would expect since we are looking at a wider geographic area than just the Vero Beach service territory. We would expect to see that reflected in a model with a coefficient that's less than 1. So we would look at that customer growth and we'd have a slightly lower customer growth for the number of residential customers. Looking at what we expect for the economy, and again, this is the Moody's Analytics data, the annual growth rates for some of these key indicators over the next 10 years are fairly strong and much stronger than we've seen recently. Population looking at about a 2.1% growth rate for Indian River County. It's been lower than that over the last 5 years. It was higher than that before 2007, sorry. The one that I'm most excited about is to see employment growth actually move into the positive range. South Florida has been devastated, even more so than we have in Central Florida. Retail sales, the retail sales forecast is the backbone of our entire forecast process. Again, we look at customers by class, customer counts, weather, that the actual weather against normal weather is an important part of the forecasting process. Something else that we look at is the change in building codes and the change in the drivers that would cause customers to use different amounts of electricity. We call that appliance efficiency and saturation. Our friends at Itron Analytics in Boston help us with developing what to expect from the building codes and the efficiencies of heating and air conditioning equipment, as well as the lighting codes that would tell whether we can buy a 100-watt light bulb or not. The technique that we actually use is called statistically adjusted end-use modeling. That's a fancy term for an econometric model that breaks the projected sales down into the component parts, the heating, cooling, other loads that would be associated with it. Residential sales, we can forecast on an average use per customer basis. While different homes of different sizes use different amounts of electricity in a given month, they tend to be fairly homogeneous. And that will help us tie the customer growth and the use of electricity pretty tightly. The changes in average household size, income, even the price of electricity will influence customer behavior. And we've tried to capture that with the history and with the economic data that we've built into these models. Commercial sales, our commercial customers are not so very homogeneous. They can range from a business with a lot of heavy compressor loads to an office with nothing but lighting. So we forecast the commercial as a group, electric sales for that group, and trend it over time. Industrial and lighting, we take outside of the statistically adjusted end-use modeling and trend those based on their recent history. If there's any indication that it will change, then we build that in based on what's actually happening in the community. Of course, we only have the one Piper aircraft industrial customer, and the last 4 years have been a little lower than the 4 years that preceded that. So we've trended that forward based on just the most recent history for that customer. We do the same thing with our Orlando forecast. We have 10 big customers that we pull out and trend forward. 2 of those customers is Universal Studios. So I wouldn't even pretend to try and build an econometric model for that one customer, but we can look at what they're building, what they're adding, the new hotels that they're putting in, and get a pretty good idea of where they're going. This is a picture that shows the residential average use on a monthly basis going back to 2001. You can see the ups and downs that reflect the cyclical water.
Excuse me, is this specific to Vero Beach?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir. I'm sorry. This is specific to Vero Beach. It trends up and down with the cyclical weather patterns. Weather history can make things shift sharply sometimes. And you'll see a blip there in the fall of 2004, and I bet everybody in this room can tell you what was going on in 2004. Our models can adjust for aberrations like that. And we'll look at this picture again later. I'll overlay the forecast on top of it, and you can see what that looks like.
Can I ask you one question about this picture? So when you're doing projections, you've got a range of, I guess, other than the anomaly, 1,000 to 1,400. Do you simply take the median or the average of that essentially for your forecasting, or do you try to use those
no, sir.
variables?
We use a multi-variable driven model, and each month is forecast separately. So January's are forecast separate from July's. We bring in the actual weather for the history. We bring in normal weather for the future, and we can backfit the model to see if it actually fit the history before we move forward with it.
Thank you. This is the average of all households, right?
Yes, sir?
The average of all households?
Yes, sir. Vero Beach, the average is about 1,000 kilowatt hours a month. It's just a little more than that. I believe it's 1027 for the most recent year. But it ranges to a high of 1,200, low of about 800. But year in and year out, it's followed a pretty smooth trend. Now I mentioned the NEL forecast early on before I started talking about the sales forecast. And the NEL forecast is one of the easiest things that I have to do. All I have to do is sum up the total of the sales forecast and add to it what we expect for line losses to allow for the energy that has to be produced at the source and delivered to the customer at his meter. It runs about 5%, a little less than that actually for Vero Beach. Can go a little higher than that in some months. It's the law of physics, and I can't think of any legislature that can has greater authority over that than the one who created it. We take that monthly net energy for load forecast and fit it to an 8,760 hour annual load shape. That gives me a projection of the hourly load for every hour in the year. I've started with 12 monthly numbers, and now I've turned it into 8,760 hourly numbers. The hourly load shape was developed for us again, by Itron Analytics in Boston. They took the daily weather patterns, they looked at the splines between heating and cooling degree days, and what had actually occurred over 10 years worth of data, and created a typical weather normalized shape for Vero Beach. I can pull the monthly ends, and then the monthly peaks, January peak to July peak, become the highest number on that month. And then the highest of the 12 becomes the peak for the year. This is a picture of that 8760 load shape. And you can see that through the summer months, down about hour number 4,000, it stays pretty high all the way through the cooling season. Everybody has their air conditioners on. We can get a little bit cooler day or a little bit warmer day, but not quite so spiky. Looking over at December and January, the 8,400 hours and the hours through about 1,000, they're the winter seasons when we're subject to winter weather. The cold snaps, if we get a few cold days in a row, it causes people to turn heat on. The heating load causes a spike in demand. And again, we look at normal weather as opposed to the extremes for that, the long term.
Okay, you're looking at what you're supplying to us, right?
Sir?
You're looking at just what you're supplying to us, not what we use.
I forecast your entire load. I don't know what's actually supplied to you.
Okay.
So I project a total peak for Vero Beach, and then someone else dispatches the power and tells us, exactly what's going down there. I have some results from Vero Beach to talk about. Here we're looking at customer counts, residential customer counts. And as you recall, we're forecasting that using population growth. There are a number of variables that would correlate well with the customer growth, and it's only a single variable that we have to look at for that. Here I've overlaid the forecast on top of that actual. You can see the red line, and there's some places historically where it departs a little bit, but the long-term trend track through that history pretty closely. This is a picture of the Vero Beach residential average use trend. If you really turn your eyeball sideways and kind of look through the middle of that, you can see that there may be an ever so slight decline. Again, it's up and down with the cyclical pattern of the weather. And there's our anomaly back in 2004. This is my average use forecast overlaid on that. Not quite as tight as we saw with the customers, but it's still fairly tight going back historically. I can't capture I'm looking at monthly weather as opposed to daily weather, so a daily spike one way or the other would push the history out of line with my forecast.
Is there a way to quantify the difference? In other words, you've shown the average use and against the projection. Can that be quantified by a difference of 1% or 2% or something that the normal person,
yes,
as skilled as you could come to some conclusion?
Yeah, we look for statistical indicators on these models, mean error of the regression, which tells us what the total variance is going backwards. We also look at the R-square value, which is how well does that line fit. We're looking at data points that are above and below what we forecast, but in total, how close are they? And
are you going to show those to us?
What I will show you is the variance on the peaks and the percent variance on the peaks for you. This one, I was not prepared to get into that level, that statistics class this morning, because it can be pretty tedious and boring. But I felt that you were, from what I was told, you were very interested in the peaks, and I wanted to talk about the variance on the peaks quite a bit.
Thank you.
Commercial sales, again, has been fairly flat over the last few years, but it has had some growth. And the economy tells us that we're going to have a little more growth over the next few years. Same kind of a picture, and you can actually see the slight uptick on these. We have the same aberration back in 2004. What I did with that data point back in 2004, I put in a 0-1 binary that told the model that this data is different from everything else you're going to look at. So don't base the future on that great big number or that little teeny number that we recorded back then. This is the picture of our industrial customer, and it's very obvious the difference between 2004 through 2009 and then the post-2009 period. What I did with this one, I assumed that they would grow back into where they were at their peak of production, and that would happen by the year 2030. So I tried to keep a fairly conservative slope to that industrial customer. Did the same thing with lighting. Lighting is so small that I couldn't see any difference going forward, so I just held it flat and figured we'd inch it up each year as we got some actual lighting numbers on that. I tried to put a graph there, and when I put it on the same gigawatt-hour scale, I couldn't see anything, so I figured I'd just tell you flat out that I held it flat. When we look at the peaks, washing out the impacts of unusual weather is one of the most difficult things. We try and put the history and the future into normal weather terms. These are the 4 most recent years, and you see that I'm showing 2010 at about 175 megawatts. That year was actually 209, but it was an unusually cold winter. We had and I'll talk in detail about the weather over those 4 years, but weather normalized was much lower than actually occurred. The most recent 3 years have been unusually warm winters that gave us peaks that were disproportionately low, and we'll talk about those too. Pushing these things forward, I get a fairly smooth slope. The economics give me a little more growth in 14 and 15 than we've had over 13 and 14. And we'll look at those 13, 14, 15 timeframes specifically. These numbers are the actuals and forecast numbers for sales, gigawatt-hour sales, 10 through 13 and a 4-year average. If we go back and look at year 2010, our forecast was for 714 gigawatt-hours. Courtesy of that nice winter, we got 741 gigawatt-hours. Weather normalized, we're looking at about 700 gigawatt-hours. The variance was a total of 27 gigawatt-hours in that year. Weather gave us 42 gigawatt-hours, and the declining economy took 15 away, which got us back to the 27. If we extend that down, you can see each of the years there. The total variance in sales has been 1.7% negative. We got 3% boost from cold weather, almost all of it. The largest share of it occurred in the winter of 2010. However, we had some warmer summers that also contributed to load in 11, 12, and 13. Our net variance, the one that I'm most concerned with, is the 4.7% off to the right. that's telling me how much the economy and the other drivers outside of weather impacted our forecast. I've done the same thing with the peaks for the same time period. We see the 209 megawatt actual for the 2010 peak. Then we can see an aggregate average variance of 4.1% over this 4-year period. Weather took away about 1%. The economy took away about 3%. Weather normalized, we're looking at 172 growing to 176. 2012 was a very interesting year economy-wise. I told you we were getting data from Moody's Analytics. They base their data on all the monthly numbers that come from the federal government, state and local governments maybe, but their source is a federal source. After 2012, I'm guessing after the election in 2012, the data for that particular year was restated downward, which caused me to pull my forecast down going into 13.
Looking at your figures for 2015, you show a real boost in both of them.
Yes, sir.
You expect the economy to pick up that much? And
I've got the economic numbers that show it going up that much. That's the forecast that the models gave me. I would need to look and see if there's additional data that would tell me something different, but based on this set of numbers, that's where I got. This is, I promised that I would show you what the weather looked like, and we look at monthly weather in terms of heating and cooling degree days. It's a departure from 65 degrees higher or 65 degrees lower. If we look back at 2010, when we enjoyed that extra load, the winter was 147% of normal. Obviously not a normal year. The most recent 3 years have been about a third lower than normal in the winter. Through the summer months, however, we've enjoyed some warm summers that have helped us with sales directly to the customers in kilowatt hours, but they have not contributed to the annual peaks. This is back, I wanted to look at what were the economic projections. The forecast that we did for 2013 was relying on economic data mostly for 2011 to 2013, that time span in there. The annual growth rate on population was projected at 1% in that year, going all the way over to gross metro product growth of 1.4%. We had projected 178 megawatt hour peak. Obviously, by the next year, things looked a lot different. The 2014 winter peak forecast, looking at 2012 through 14, we've shaved off quite a lot from the population projection. All the way across the board, the economic indicators were trended downward. And that's principally due to the restatement on 12 as opposed to a real trend that changed. The history backwards before 12 was also restated. The 2015 forecast, the most recent forecast that I did, we were looking at 2013 to 15 numbers. We see a nice jump from the forecast we did a year ago and even the forecast 2 years ago in the economic indicators, which led me to that higher peak number. As an aside on this, and not necessarily something I'm terribly proud of or that my bosses are terribly pleased with, I've been a little more accurate with the Vero Beach forecast than I have been with the forecast for Orlando Utilities Commission.
You think they're going to look at this tape?
You can bet on
Do they have more residents?
We have a few more residents, and that's a very interesting point. And when I have to defend myself, our forecasting team does forecasts for Orlando, St. Cloud, and then Vero Beach and a couple of other municipalities. If I add them all together, it washes out a lot of the variance and it looks nice and tight. But when you start isolating small geographic areas, it breaks down quite a bit. The big utilities have the advantage of forecasting all the way across the state so that it smooths some of those spikes out for them.
Could you go back to that last slide for just a second, please? So the difference between 2014 and 2015 is attributable principally to not household growth, I guess. It's the employment?
Household and employment, household growth boosts our customer growth, and then employment would boost our commercial growth.
Across most of this, you've shown 25,000 customers, and we hear 33,000 customers. What is?
I believe I'm isolating those into just the classes. So when I talked about residentials, I did not add in the commercial or the other classes to it. And of course, I think you probably include the total for your lighting sales too. There are quite a few of those that go into the total number of delivery points.
Have you,
Am I?
Yeah, it's 28,000
how have you addressed, am I interrupting somebody? How have you addressed the increased efficiency per household? I know in my case, I was looking at the records, and I bought 5 major appliances in the last 5 or 6 years, and every one of them paid for themselves over a fairly short, less than 10-year cycle.
Yes, sir. And we're seeing customers, residential customers, doing that in every jurisdiction. We participate in the Electric Utility Forecasters Forum. It's a group of people that do the same kind of work that I do. And we've talked about these things. How have people been changing their usages, installing those high SEER HVAC units to replace the older ones. We build that into the models with the saturation and efficiency data that Itron builds for us. And the air conditioning, SEER air conditioning, for example, the increased efficiency for air conditioning is a big one. It takes about 15 years from the time of a code change until it washes all the way through all of the customers. We're seeing that slight downward trend in average use per customer on the residential side now. And it will, if we were to go out 20 years into the future, it would continue until all of those everyone had the more efficient appliances. The smart early adapters are really reaping the benefits early on.
I didn't see much, of a downward trend when I looked at the projected per household data.
Yeah, it's that slicing up and down tends to kind of make it hard to see. I wish I'd created a picture of the average over time for you, and it would have been a little easier to follow.
This may be way too simplistic, but when you did the actual results, there was a decrease of about 3%, a little over 3% over the last 3 actual years used in the forecast. If I take 3% of 180 in the 2015 projection, it's about 5.4 megawatts. And in my mind, if you've got a trend line and it's at that level, and we see here the forecast 178 and 13, 173 and 14. I'm having a little hard comprehending why the model is indicating that the peak load is 180 in the year 2015. And I say that my simplistic solution is that should be reduced by 5 and be somewhere in the neighborhood of 175. Now, again, your model has come up with a different conclusion. Is there one overriding set of factors that have got you to that point, given these trend lines, historical trend lines, or recent historical trend lines?
Yeah, again, we look at the weather normalized trends and we fold in all of those variables. With any model, there is variance around the projection that would be equally acceptable, and we take the one in the middle. And the term, I second guess my forecasts from day one forward. And it's just like watching football on Sunday. I can tell you what that quarterback did wrong in every single play, but I think that he probably goes out and does the best he can. Yeah, Lawrence is reminding me. We have been trying to track the economy and predict what's going to happen going forward. The economic experts that create these numbers have told us that the economy is going to end tomorrow for the last 5 years, to the point where we're all tired of hearing that. But I believe it's actually happening because I looked at the most recent in-migration for Indian River County, and it's actually going up again. So I took that as some confirmation that maybe the economy really is getting better now. Looking back in time, though, I thought that it was going to happen in 2013, and I thought it was going to happen in 2012. I don't think I'm alone there, though.
But the basic driver of increase in power, so the basic driver of increase in power is population, is it not?
The growth in residences, Vero Beach has a higher percentage of residential sales than commercial sales. So the growth in sales will come from growth in residences early on. Commercial sales typically will follow. The businesses follow where the customers are.
Do you use things like building permits and so on to forecast growth or construction?
We've looked at building permits, and it gives us a trend. It's a little difficult to get building permits into the models, but it is an indicator that we look at to verify that the specific economic indicators are matching up with what's happening at a governmental level.
You talk about air conditioning as being one of the major usages for domestic power. How does lighting compare with air conditioning?
The lighting standard changed a year or so ago, and I've noticed that when I go to buy light bulbs now, I can't buy the 100-watt light bulbs anymore. And at Orlando Utilities, we're changing out a lot of our street lighting to put in the LED lighting that's much more efficient. And I had to go into the OUC model and actually reduce my lighting to account for those change-outs. We also have a couple of large customers that we know who are changing out that lighting, and it's reflected in our forecast there. I'm not aware of programs for Vero Beach that would be lowering the lighting demands. The public lighting, a 10% shift isn't going to change our forecast significantly at this time in lighting. A 10% shift in residential sales would be huge.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm just taking a kind of a very layman's look at what I think are projections for Vero Beach, and I think if you look at, it's a little harder to fathom the personal, individual growth rate in people and so on, but it doesn't look like it's taking off like a rocket, plus things like building permits and all that sort of stuff has a fairly good lag of a year or so. If you look at our industrial base, which is very, single digit, again, the lag's even longer on development and so on to get their sales back up. And the commercial kind of follows everything. So to me, it looks like in the immediate future, the next couple years, I don't know what's going to happen 3 or 4 years from now, that the trend is probably still down, even if we go up. And then it gets better. So I'm looking again at the more recent projections of the peak going up and the load going up, which is based on our yearly rate after that. And it seems like for the next year or two, that should be flattened out a lot. I just don't understand where the growth, the immediate 2-year, 3-year growth is coming from. After that, I don't try to predict, but I wonder if you could comment on whether we need to set back some of these projections in the immediate future, just ratchet the whole thing down.
What's actually occurring with the customers and their consumption is, you're correct, it's very hard to capture in there. I can't make a judgment call for, I can follow the numbers, but I can't make a judgment call on what would be seen on a day in and day out basis.
But would you in any way comment on the fact, again, the 180?
180,
numbers like that, should that be looked at again?
Well, I would look at everything into the future. The 180 is certainly a lot lower than 209, but it's higher than we've seen recently.
Well, it's a pretty significant increase over last year.
Yes, sir.
Households, is that, I noticed early on in your presentation you used the information, I forget the actual name of it, you don't have the slide up here anymore, but it basically encompassed the county.
Yes, sir.
It's Vero Beach, Sebastian, which was basically Indian River County.
Indian River County, yes.
So do you think that there's going to be a 2% growth in households inside our service territory?
No, sir. I believe that what we saw with the population trend, the customer growth is slightly lower than the population growth projected for the SMSA.
I mean,
so I would expect the customer growth to be lower than the population
How much
growth.
lower was that? Do you recall?
I do not recall. I'll have to look up that. I'll have to look up that coefficient that went against it, but it was less than 1, so 0.8, 0.9 to less than 1.
But here you're showing a 2% increase in households on this particular screen.
And again, that's for the entire standard metropolitan statistical area. Your growth it's like Orlando. I'm projecting Orlando with a fairly strong growth for the SMSA. They put all of Central Florida together, which is a 4-county area. Our service territory is bounded, so I know that it's not going to grow at the rate that the counties are going to grow. Same thing with Vero Beach. You're a bounded service territory. You're not going to grow at the same rate that the county will.
Substantially built out, too.
Yeah. You will have some growth, and it has occurred historically right up until the last few months. But it's not, you're right, it is not the same growth rate as the SMSA.
Have you forecast at all the effects of the penetration of the new technology, for example?
Yes, sir. We actually buy that from Itron Analytics, and they look at the lighting standard changes, the code changes. They look at when do we expect the new air conditioning heating units to go in over time, and they give us a data set that I can build into the models.
And is that the only thing they forecast? Do they look at lighting and water heating?
Yeah, they give us a heating efficiency saturation estimate, a cooling heating saturation, and then the other is built up from lighting and assumed plug-in loads. And they build that data set out looking at things like flat screen TVs use a whole lot less electricity than our big old CRT TVs did, and they will be the standard. They've been adopted fairly quickly. But then going way out in time, the screens get bigger and bigger, so some of that comes back.
You've certainly. Well, were you done? I'm sorry.
No, yeah, I'm done. Thank you.
You've certainly defended your methodology, and I'm trying to avoid the political issue. But do you present to someone one model, two models, three models? In other words, when you're making the projection, does someone in upper management make a judgment as to whether or not they think this analysis is appropriate, or that Model B is better than Model A for the following reasons?
We actually do discuss the modeling. Our forecasting team reports to the chief financial officer, and he's bringing in a lot of information that is not necessarily reflected in the models. And we show him exactly how we build the models. When we get ready to pull out one data set and put in another, we review that with him. When most recently we looked at what do we think average weather is into the future, and we reviewed that at some detail too. The things that we've done for our Orlando 2013 forecast is currently being reviewed by our management. We believe that we've nailed it pretty well, but until our commission actually puts a stamp on it, I can't say that it's approved.
Are you graying early?
No, I'm just old. I'm just old. Whenever they bring a new employee in, it raises both the average IQ and lowers the average age.
I got one more.
Yes, sir.
It may not be your question. Probably don't get involved in this, but what happens if Vero Beach for the next cycle, not trying to talk about the ones they've already approved, just says, no, we won't sign off, that we think it should be lower?
I believe that's within your prerogative, but I don't know I don't know anything about that.
I think that's getting into a contract type question, and
Yes, sir. And that is, it is sort of out of his purview.
Yeah, I figured that.
But we do have a section in the contract, and it's 3.2F, that allows for, if we disagree with their forecast, we have the right to go out and hire an engineer consultant to come up with a revised forecast. That third-party forecast would be the overriding forecast going into the next year future.
We would have to get an outside consultant to do this?
Yes, sir.
So
Someone
we have
who
to take on certain expenses to...
Yes, sir, and be somebody that specializes in that effort.
And what happens when the guy comes in with a lower forecast?
That forecast is what we use into the next year according to the contract.
Okay, so that,
all right, so
we would rule without arbitration or something like that then?
That is correct.
I think this has been interesting, and I think one of the things I just want to clarify, perhaps for the public, is the reason that we're looking into this kind of arcane forecasting is 54% last year of our cost from Orlando Utilities Commission was the capacity charge, and that capacity charge is basically the fixed price that we're paying so that we make sure that Orlando reserves sufficient electricity to supply our peak needs. But that, based on this, the increase from 173 that we see on the screen here to 180, has pushed a 7.5% increase into the capacity charge, into the capacity, which would translate into an increase to the charge. And so the reason that we're looking at this and the reason we're trying to understand where these numbers come from and why we went from 173 to 180 is because this has a very big effect on our cost for what we pay to OUC and what we have to then charge to our customers. I'm still, I'm not satisfied or comfortable with the increase from 170, the 7.5% increase.
Mr. Chairman, I think I heard that they would take back any other information we have and maybe look at those numbers again. Is that what I heard in your presentation?
I'll take all the information I can use. I can't commit to anything that would relate to the contract,
but at least he could relook at that number if we have something that I think that we could inject that he would at least take back to review.
Okay, because
now there's one thing we need to remember. An example is our tourism tax is up substantially this year, which means there's more people staying in rooms and hotels, which implies that meter is turning for more hotel rooms per day today than they were this time last year. So there are some indicators that we're moving up. We've also issued probably more building permits in the last year than we have in many years previous. But a lot of that is indicators of the future, not necessarily 2015. But I think what I've heard in the presentation is that if we can pull something out and they would go back, no guarantees of anything, and revisit some of their forecasting and part of their elements of their model to look at. But we obviously have under the contract a provision that allows us, if we totally disagree with whatever the final product is, a way to move forward.
As I was talking to Tom earlier, he was saying that the OUC peaks that he gave me, sometimes we buy from other people, and I hope when we program who we buy from, we take into account this charge, because that charge is essentially the same as the cost of the power. And if we can keep that down by getting it from somebody else, it would be good.
Right, and now we got to remember OUC does do those purchases for us. We have another provision in the contract that does not allow us to go out and do economy purchases.
No, but we have the other places that we get power from normally that we should maximize first before we buy anything from OUC.
Well, that's a whole other policy issue. Scott, looking at these factors and the model that's been presented, I mean, it would be difficult, I think, and we all understand the issue, to come up with a rationale to change population, households, employment, weather, all the things that go into the forecast. I mean, we'd have to become conversant in all of those factors, I think, and unless you simply raise the objection that we were uncomfortable based on the last 3-year trend rate. I mean, that seems to me the only thing that we might be able to offer to them to consider another forecast peak. And you've got a different approach or solution to that.
Well, I agree that we're not in the position to become experts on how to do these models, but we do have the right to hire an expert, and I don't think at this point in time we need to do that. I'm not going to recommend that at this point in time. I would perhaps we should then take another look at that earlier projections versus actual, and you had an earlier screen that's bring that back up and we can talk about that?
This one, I believe, are the peaks, the forecast. There we go. The actuals and the weather normalized actuals. And again, I can't make any contract commitments, but I'm happy to crunch whatever numbers need to be crunched.
Oh, we're not asking you to do that. We understand that. And the
We just don't like that 173 to 180. That's what
Yeah.
we don't like.
I did not mean in any way to say that we're ready to jump on this or anything like that. I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, and I
What I had
appreciate
read.
that you're constantly doing what's best for your customers,
Absolutely.
just as every other utility should do.
yeah, I'm just so Jim or Cindy, do we? I mean, there was an earlier chart about the population of Vero Beach versus the projection for basically for the county, and one more forward. There we go.
We had it.
You had it.
There we go. Is this the one we were looking for?
No, I
No.
think he was looking at the one that had the overriding blue and red line that showed, no,
Customer or?
keep going forward.
That's the one I was looking for. And maybe I should be looking at the other one, but this is the one I don't see. Vero Beach population has been flat and actually has decreased from '06.
But remember, 60% of our service is in a growth area. For example, we have a developer who just came in with some plans for somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 housing units that will be in our service area. And we have been working with that developer for 3 or 4 months. And so in our service area, and I know probably in the moorings, you guys are probably doing some things, not the moorings, but Grand Harbor, doing some development of those empty lots, and that's what we see happening in some of the areas that are controlled or gated communities. They're starting now to build on some of those lots, and so we see a trend now. Will in 2024, our service area, assuming that we still have a service area, it would. I'm not sure it would change that much, although we also have redevelopment trends going on. Not to the like of everyone, but I mean, we have some gigantic houses replacing some relatively small houses anytime you have water around. As a matter of fact, I was just talking to somebody last night that they see in a neighborhood that the average square footage is somewhere in the neighborhood of 1850. It's a 6,500 square foot house now being built in that lot. So on a lot. So those are some of the trends that feed into that, and the square foot consumption, I think, is the key to where we're going. But again, I keep going back. I think it's a reasonable request to just ask if they could go back and revisit and make sure that everyone is comfortable, or at least they are still comfortable with that growth projection they have for 2015. I would presume it's the same as their management would ask them to do in any projections that they may have, because their capacity cost impacts OUC as well. They have to bill for that, sign contracts for future purchasing going into the future. That's part of their capacity projections.
For each reduction in MW, let's say from 180 to, I don't know, use 175, 5 megawatts, what is that in dollar terms? What does that equate to in terms of Can you do a quick analysis, Cindy?
It's about $6 million.
If the megawattage projection in our capacity is reduced by 5,
5.
It's about
From
6.
180 to 175.
It's about
Well, if we look at the increase from 14 to 15, which is that same number, it's about $1.7 million.
Oh, okay.
so I think it's worth visiting.
Well, it's worth visiting, but if we're moving in that direction, and what are the risks again? You commented at the last meeting about what the risk would be if, in fact, the two parties agreed to a different figure. What could we face in the event that the projection he's used is adequate and where it should be?
If we exceed our capacity that we have contracted for, we can go out, or OUC actually starts the process of going out and trying to purchase that capacity online, buying it from the marketplace. And then you also have to get reservation of transmission. So if the whole state was under some type of peak at the time that we were out and we exceeded our capacity charges, in theory, you could either have a low supply that you couldn't buy the megawatts, or B, you don't have the transmission to get it to the city of Vero Beach, and at that point you would have possible brownouts.
So couldn't we then turn on 3 and 4?
Well, but that's part of our capacity as well, and probably 3 and 4. If the state's into that peak, which has occurred, we have usually had 3 and 4 on already. And in some cases, we've even turned on 1, which is, what is that, how many megawatts? Very small. 11 megawatts. So we have dispatched our units in times when the state has had some real peak issues. It really doesn't just affect the city of Vero Beach. That would be an extreme that would call for, but under what we're doing is trying to reserve capacity that meets all of our requirements all the time, and there is a cost to that.
Aren't our transmission lines already contracted for at a certain level?
Yes, sir.
So they wouldn't
at our
change.
capacity. Our transmission is based on our capacity. So in other words, OUC is required by contract to have transmission enough to get the capacity to the city of Vero Beach.
So even the capacity changes based on this number?
The commitment is the transmission to get capacity to us, yes, sir, based on what our capacity that we're paying for.
So as a general view and in your experience, would you find it, as one of the people responsible along with the city council, to make sure that you've got sufficient capacity in order to avoid the problems associated with finding other avenues to provide the power?
I use the analogy, it's like an insurance policy. And the answer is yes. I feel much more comfortable when we have capacity under contract than if we don't have capacity under contract. And it goes back to you're buying an insurance policy. $1.7 million is a lot of money, don't get me wrong, and I understand that. But in the fact that we're serving 34,000 customers, and in many cases, our peak could be wind up at the same time that we have our hotels full.
Jim, it's not $1.7 million. That's just the increase. It's $15.8 million is what our insurance policy is.
That's the entire flat fee.
Flat fee.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay, we're paying a portion of that anyway. Yes.
Yes. So,
yes. We are paying that.
Yeah, but that's the increase from the 1.7 is the increase from 14 to 15.
Can I add a comment about the customer numbers just because of something that I know when we first started talking about this, we were talking about 33,000, but we have actually experienced a very steady rise in our customer count, commensurate with their forecasting. I mean, we're up at 34.5 as of the end of March in number of accounts, and even if we remove the outdoor lighting from that, it's still over 34,000. Across the winter months, we had a growth in residential customers of 20, in some cases 50 accounts per month, and the only other comment would be just, looking at this, I mean, this this is since, if I read this correctly, 2001, right? And even in periods of time where it might have been difficult to do so, I think what they're showing here is that they've nailed it in terms of customer growth. So, certainly I'd say, even though many of us don't like the idea, I think there are starting to be quite a number more people in Vero Beach, and our accounts do show a steady growth in the last year or so 2 years.
I'd like.
Go ahead.
Yeah. I would not like to change the basic formulas that set up how much you need extra to be safe and things like that. So how much extra capacity you need, that needs to stay where it is. But it is obvious that when that peak projection goes up, whether the actual peak or not goes up, that our price goes up. And I would very much like to see kind of a second look taken at the next couple of years, not way out, because
I'm like you.
yeah, and maybe continue to take a hard look based on realities of the last couple of years and the known response to the growth rate that just can't be that fast. Like Piper, they can get a huge contract tomorrow, and they can grow with that very instantly, but not the big sweep. You know, they're not going to really take off for a couple of years. It's going to take them. I did a study on this a long time ago on aerospace. It's about a 10-year cycle. And it's 5 going up and 5 going down. It doesn't sit anywhere. So basically, you got a couple of years before Piper can really ramp up no matter what somebody wants them to do. And although there will be some instant ramp, and since that's a big factor in our look, and also the same thing with housing and everything else, it doesn't. We can see what growth has happened, and from that you can project not only the growth, but it seems to me there are some limits on growth that you can kind of project for the short term. And that right now I think could help us a lot.
Scott, I don't know whether it's helpful or not, but it seems to me that to go back and ask for the remodeling may be a legitimate exercise at this time, but it also appears to me that 2014 may prove to be a better baseline in terms of the projection in 2015. And if people agree with that, would we, if 2014 actual results are the baseline, will that give us and them time to conceivably adjust the increase in megawattage from in 2015? Is that when the policy decision or the treasurer makes his decision? Or is that something that they're
I'm not sure where the forecast leaves off and the contract takes up.
Okay.
As I mentioned, our new forecast has not been approved yet. So we're subject to change our forecast until our board acts on it. I would think that you'd want to talk with the contract folks about what can and can't be done.
I think it's
What year
important
is
to
your
take
new
away.
But, I live to crunch these numbers, and I'm sorry, I don't have much of a life, but I do love to crunch these numbers. And if you give me a couple more months of data and tell me to run off and do something with it, I love doing that.
What year?
But I also like keeping my job, and I've just gotten the last child out of college, and I'd like to make plans to retire. So.
What year, when you say the new projection hasn't been approved, what year are you talking about?
We do a forecast every year for OUC the same way we do a forecast every year for Vero Beach. We do the Vero Beach forecast in December, January. This year I used actual data through November and then estimated December, January forward. We did the OUC forecast in January using actual data through December. And then now we've got a few more months that we're kind of watching on a month-to-month basis, but we've locked that one down, I believe. But yeah, I would love nothing better than to recrunch numbers.
So you say basically the 2015 numbers that we're seeing here are not approved.
The Orlando forecast has not been approved. I don't know where we stand contract-wise with Vero Beach or not.
How does the Orlando increase, or did the Delta in Orlando compare to the Delta in Vero Beach?
We did not go down quite as far as Vero Beach employment-wise and gross domestic product-wise. So we did not get quite as much of a bounce up, but long-term we have a little stronger growth than Vero Beach.
No, I'm just not just in terms of your.
We went up. Yeah, our forecast went up about 50 megawatts on the peak,
which relates in a percentage.
We're looking at not quite 5% on our all-time peak. So I'm subject to check. I'm pulling some things deeply from my memory and. Yeah. Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. We're also a summer peaking utility. So we make our peak in August as opposed to January, except in 2010 when we had a January peak.
These forecasts are essentially static in the sense that you don't forecast for any attempt by Vero Beach or OUC to encourage reduction in usage in customers. You're just assuming everything goes on the way it always has.
The models capture the code-related changes that would occur in consumption. We also look at programs for conservation for Orlando. However, the actual results have been so small that it's negligible. I'm not aware of conservation programs at Vero that would have make a substantial change in the forecast.
Well, probably not for OUC, but for Vero it might.
Yes, sir.
Okay, we have one member of the public that wants to address a question. So.
Thank you very much. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Mark Mucher, 617 Indian Lilac Road. When I first got up to ask my question about 20 minutes ago, it was going to be along the same lines of Scott's question, how the fact that the SMSA covers the whole, pretty much the whole county. The city of Vero Beach is relatively built out and stagnant, but the service territory is a real unusual duck. So it's not really supported by any national forecasts as specifically our service area. This chart is interesting, along with Cindy's comments that we are growing, but I don't know what the rate of that growth is. I think Tom mentioned last month maybe 1%. What I'm not seeing here is what makes anybody think that next year everything's going to take off. In other words, the household rate is going to double, the population, the rate of growth is going to double, the population rate of growth is going to double, the commercial rate is going to more than double just next year, and I don't know really what supports that. I haven't heard or seen that. If you look at that graph there, we've been level or going down, and in fact, the actual is under the forecast, not by a lot, but somewhat. But then again, as I just said, it takes off in 2015. So I guess I'm saying I'd really like to. I'd really hope they can take a look at that 180 number based on actuals. And it looks like they are looking at our actual customer base and usage and everything. But I think they need to take a look at their assumptions on what is going to make our little area, which doesn't seem to be growing that much, take off next year and go to that 180. Thanks.
Thank you. I appreciate those comments, Mark. And I do also, the increase from 1% to 2% is a pretty big jump in the 1% to 3% in the economic growth. I mean, I'd love to have that. I hope we have that, but I'm maybe a little bit more of a pessimistic after how many years of this
This recession's dragged on much too long.
Yeah, if we said 2008 was 1929, we're in a
we're in the
1936.
We're in the middle of the war now.
Yeah. So I would like, to Cindy, Jim, if there's anything that you've seen that you might want to call to their attention that we could do that. And I know that you've said some of the things you're comfortable with their numbers and the growth projections. I mean, this is just a huge number that if we can't really control, we can monitor their inputs. And they've been. I appreciate your willingness to take another look at these numbers if we have any additional details for you. I really do. I appreciate that. OUC is definitely our partner in this, and that cooperative nature of our relationship has shown very clearly through today, or very clearly evident today. So, we are charged trying to keep our rates as low as possible, and this is an area that we've looked at. It's an area that, again, the 7.5% increase in capacity is a big jump. It's a big jump, and so that's why we're taking a look at it. And so hopefully we can maybe find something. We'll put our heads together. Maybe we can find something. Maybe we can tweak that number a little bit and save our ratepayers some money going forward. Any other questions for the gentleman from OUC?
I have a question about the math. 7.5%, and the 1.7 million is due to the 7.5% increase in the cost, correct?
Correct. And I will say also, as a numbers cruncher, I'm kind of up here winging it with those numbers too. So,
well, let me have you wing another one. 33,000 customers into $1.7 million. I come up with about $500 a year. If you divide 33,000 into $1.7 million, so that if in theory, the extra cost passed on to each consumer without all the variables, but it's just $500 a year.
Our customers are at 34,000 now.
Well, okay, well, it'd be between $400 and $500. If, for instance, we went back and redid the analysis and you came up with a reduction of 2 MW, you might be saving $150 a year for the average customer. Am I wrong?
Actually, if I take
34,000 into $1.7 million.
Cindy.
$7 million, and I'm not wigging it. I have the calculator, but I get 50, not 500.
50. Well,
$50.
Yes, yes.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you for the clarification. I had too many zeros. But
I never do math in my head. That's why I carry this. You know?
I mean, I'm not. The exercise has been fabulous, and I think it's been illuminating for everybody, and a job well done. But for $50 a month, and I sort of favor looking at the risk side of this, because you don't want to put yourself in that position ever. I think it's problematic. Doesn't suggest, however, if there are good reasons, as Scott has suggested, to go back and ask for a reanalysis. But when you actually look at the cost of decreasing that cost and the impact on the consumer, it's much less than I thought it was, and I think it's been helpful, Scott, for you to bring out that cost figure. So. Anyhow, that's where I'm coming from.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, we'll go back and look at our information that we have available and pass that on to OUC if we have any concerns. For example, the growth issue, and let us talk to the planning department, get a little information on what is being projected in the area, because a lot of that has to be laid out by both the electric and the planning department. So we'll take a look at that, and then we get our revision of our assessed values coming up here pretty soon. That'll give us an indication of where the economy is going, and some percentage at least of an indicator of what the type of growth trend is going, and we'll get that by June the 1st or something like that. So maybe if we can find one of those indicators, we will ask OUC to go back and take a revisit of some of those numbers.
Okay, and thank you, Jim. And they've been very cooperative, and thank you very much for...
Mr. Chairman, commission members, I appreciate, again, the opportunity to come down here. The one thing I can take away, I know my economic data comes in quarterly, so I can revisit and take a look and see if I know more now than I knew before. But again, contracts, I'm just the numbers guy.
Okay,
Thank you again.
Thank you very much. Okay. Cindy, are you ready to start? Okay. So we're going to do our rate.
Talk about our rate sufficiency. The other thing that I can do, if it's of interest to you, is I can take easily 3 or 4 years worth of customer number of accounts per each customer class, commercial, residential, and obviously Piper's Piper, and put that in a table and a graph for you if you'd like, so you can see, from our perspective, that the actual numbers and the growth in customers over the last 2 or 3 years. So. What you have in front of you is our second quarter of this fiscal year electric utility rate sufficiency. This has been updated to include actuals through the end of March for both our sales and our revenue, as well as our purchase power. The bottom line here is that we're recommending that the bulk power cost be decreased from $75 per 1,000 kilowatt hours to $69.50 per 1,000 kilowatt hours for the remainder of the year starting in June. And that would be for the average residential customer about a 4.2% decrease. If you look at the information that's attached, it's probably easiest to see it on the actual graph information on the very last page. Essentially what's happened is we've done a pretty good job this year of forecasting both sales and the revenues associated with them. In the 1 month where we were a little higher in November and also in February on sales, our revenue was correspondingly higher. So I think we've done a better job of that forecasting this year. But you'll see on a number of these months, our purchase power forecast was down substantially from our original estimate. Bottom line, what that means is we're forecasting through the end of the year that we'll be about $1 million lower in expenses for purchase power, and right now about $500,000 better in revenue, primarily in the residential class. So that extra $1.5 million translates into this recommended rate decrease. The only other thing I wanted to point out, because this came up in the Finance Commission, if you're talking about $1.5 million, I know we've talked here in the past about $1 million equals about 1%. Well, that's true across a 12-month period. But if you have $1.5 million that you're making up across a 4-month period, that's 1.5% times 3, which gives us that about 4.2% reduction. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Otherwise, we're just looking for your either endorsement of staff's recommendation of the decrease effective June 1 or not. The other thing I wanted to point out is that I know we talked a bit here just now about the potential increase in costs for purchase power next year. Keep in mind that we've also just taken an action that's reduced our cost next year by a little over $1.1 million, and that is we paid off that debt service. So, what we're looking at here is we're hoping, all other things being equal, that we can lower these rates for some relief for the summer, but that we also have other things that will come into play come October that will not cause us to have to then, spike them back up again. That $1.1 million in debt savings to offset some of these potential increases from OUC, based on what we just discussed. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
I got a quick question. The debt service, we're paying $6.7 million a year. When do we pay off that debt?
The second piece of the debt, the 2003A, runs out through I don't have it here in my chart. It runs out through, I think, about another 9 or 10 years, and essentially what we would have to do, what we were planning to do at the sale of the electric utility, is escrow enough money to pay it through the call date of 2018 or 19. The one we just paid off is going to reduce our debt service by about $1.1 million a year, and that was going to be gone in about 3 years anyway. But at least for the next 3 years, we've taken care of that one already.
So the other one's about 8-9 years more.
I could get something more accurate. It's probably about 4 or 5 years out before we could pay it off if we had the money, and I think it's got about another 10 or 11 years to run before it's
complete. I was just wondering what would normal be.
Right. We're paying it off at a little over $5 million a year in principal, and right now the outstanding principal is around $40 million. So we're getting 8, 9, 10 years.
Thank you.
Remind me again why 2 quarters ago you recommended a 1.2% increase in rates, which, as you know, I objected to, but I thought we ought to wait a quarter. So what's the dramatic change here in 2 quarters that have led you to move from a rate increase of 1.2% to a decrease now of 4.2%, which I assume, by the way, would be for the remainder of the fiscal period?
Just for the remainder of the fiscal period. 2 things. It's about $1 million. If you look at this here, our year-end total for purchase power is projected to be at 60.1. Our original forecast of purchase power was at 61.2. So essentially $1 million less in purchase power cost forecasted through the end of the year. And then our revenue is projected to be about, even at the lower rates, about $500,000 higher than we thought because of primarily November and February. Remember, again, with the normal weather, we can predict the normal cost, but when we have a really cold month like that, and we have higher sales, our rate tends to kick our revenues up above 1,000, probably more dramatically than it does in a normal month. So it's primarily the purchase power cost, but then also some improvements in revenue. And again, year before last, I think what we did was we kind of went the other way, being conservative with our purchase power cost forecast, and what happened to us as a result was us kind of slowly inching it up all year long. And what we did this fiscal year in question was tried to be, conservative and make sure that we had that cushion, so that if anything, if it panned out, we could maybe go the other direction. One of the things we're always trying to avoid, at least what we've been trying to avoid for the last 3 years, is wild swings. I don't think that does anyone any good. We went to longer periods of time without rate changes, and also just trying to keep a reasonable margin and not have it up by 5%, down by 8%, up by 6%, down by 10%. I don't think that kind of rate changing frequency or size is a good thing to do. So.
Cindy, how are our reserves doing? And that was the rate increase that we did 2 quarters ago was primarily, I think, because we were concerned about our reserves. We were getting a little low.
What we're showing now is that we'll still end the year with about that same $900,000 margin that we had in place originally to replenish our reserves. I think you should have received a copy of the second quarter finance report, budget and actuals report for the city. Right now, our cash in the electric utility was up to $30 million from 27 at the end of the first quarter, and our days of unrestricted cash on hand had gone up to 86, and I think first quarter was down in the 70s. So we're having some improvement in that cash position as well, and we feel pretty comfortable about being in good shape at the end of the year.
What's the industry standard? What is our goal for the unrestricted?
Our stated
days?
goal has always been 90.
90.
You know, as we discussed in one meeting, 90 is actually kind of a minimum, you know, depending on what you look at in terms of, for instance, Moody and Fitch bond rating criteria. They encourage something much larger than that. GFOA recommended best practices says, depending on the nature of your utility, 90 is really a starting point, and then you can adjust upward or downward depending on your circumstances. But 90 is what we've been shooting for, and we're back up around 86. So.
Did the Finance Committee recommend this?
They did. They met Thursday afternoon, reviewed this, and recommended unanimously to endorse the staff recommendation of the decrease.
I'd move
I'll second it.
that we recommend this to the City Council for reduction of, what, 4.2%?
The 4.2%.
Typical 1,000 kilowatt bill.
Mm-hmm.
Which,
Well-
by the way, I think it's interesting to note, and we have a motion and a second, so under discussion. What is it? Is about 2/3 of our customers, Cindy, are, on average every month, are at 1,000 kilowatts or less?
And that's borne out by the data that OUC just provided, which is that essentially the average across the year is 1,027. I think that was what they indicated. So that 1,000 kilowatt hour residential customer isn't a bad benchmark to use.
Right. So that's because I know there's been a lot of talk around the state that 1,200 is a better number to use for benchmarking, but for us, I think 1,000 is the number. Again,
It's
2/3 of our
reasonable.
customers on an average basis are 1,000 or less,
Right.
and so again, like you say, the OUC. I noted that too. I thought, well, that's just again showing that. Any other discussion on this motion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion passes unanimously.
And as we always do, we will bring it back to you again at the end of this coming quarter to see how we did and to make sure that we make any needed course corrections. So.
And I have one other couple things for you, Cindy, before you leave, and I missed our public comment on this motion. And hopefully, he's not going to object to it and cause us to reconsider the motion. But we have not received I personally did not receive the variance analysis. And
I will say this, when we prepare it, it is available on the city's website. There's a section under the finance department that has reports for 13-14, and the variance analysis and the quarterly reports are there. However, we'll be happy to make sure that we email you a copy. Okay. The other thing is I've stopped the practice just for cost savings of making hard copies for everyone, but anyone who would like to have a hard copy of either the quarterly report or the variance analysis, please just let Sherry know, and we're happy to make one for you. I just stopped doing it as a matter of course because there was just a giant stack of books and not everyone cared. So
I would like to, though, on a quarterly basis, to review the variances, and specifically the variances that are greater or less than 10%, so we can continue to manage the utilities or to have the information. Because, why are we spending more money than we thought? Why are we spending less money than we thought? Both of those are things, useful information for us and for the public.
If you'd like, Mr. Chairman, we can go back, and I think we did it for a while, to adding a review for you of the electric and water sewer utility portion of those quarterly reports to your agendas on a quarterly basis.
Yes, that's what I'm asking for. So if we can do that next month. And I know that will be June, and June won't be ready, but we'll do it.
We can do the March one we just.
Right. Okay. Mark.
Mark Mucher, 617 Indian Lilac Road again. I had two questions. I understand that the fuel cost is the major driver in our rates, or the major proportion of our expenses. But it looks to me like this analysis only took into consideration revenue and fuel costs, but not other costs. So I don't have a feel for whether the other costs, whether they be power plant or T&D or anything else, are trending up or down in terms of the actuals in this same period. We didn't look at that. Well, according to this analysis, we only looked at fuel and revenue. So that'd be one question I had. The other is that we just talked about a huge increase in our capacity costs, and yet we're lowering rates based on fuel costs going down. So I don't know how the timing goes in there, but are we going to need next quarter or whenever this capacity cost kicks in, are we going to need an adjustment to adjust for that? And the third thing was that Cindy just said, she talked about a $1 million swing in the fuel costs and a countervailing but equally favorable $1 million swing in the revenues. That's $2 million, and we're reducing it by 4%, which should be 2%. But I assume the $1 million debt repayment is entering into that, so that might bring us up to 3. But I never understood that debt load thing anyway, because we only saved $133,000 a year in interest. It was just a cash flow basis. But if I could get some answers to that, I'd be happy. Thank you.
On the other costs, yes, right now the electric utility rate sufficiency, other than revenues and purchase power, includes the adopted budget numbers. I will tell you, through our second quarter report, there aren't that many variances between actuals and budget, none that would leave us to adjust the budget. The only one of any significance is we have spent far less in the non-departmental area in transactional attorney expenses than we expected this year, where we budgeted $1 million and have spent maybe an average of 12 or 13 a month. So there is, some margin there, but we also didn't adjust this for taking cash and paying that loan off. So that, I think that's reasonable. But yes, otherwise we're not seeing anything cost-wise in our operating costs that's real different from the budget. So we haven't made any adjustments there. Let's start with number 3, which helps us with number 2, I think. We're projecting to be $1.5 million better off between now and the end of the current fiscal year. If it's $1 million equals 1% for a 12-month period, then to be $1.5 million better off for 4 months is 3 times 1.5%. So that's the reason it's a 4% decrease. And this is we're only talking about through the end of this fiscal year. The increased capacity cost from OUC would come into play in January of 2015 and therefore affect 2014-15's forecast. And not having to pay that debt service of $1.1 million next year comes into play also in 2014-15. So 3/4 of a year in 14-15 with that extra $1.7 million versus an entire year without that $1.1 million, we think it's reasonable to do this now. If nothing else changes dramatically, those two things should offset each other, and so that increased capacity cost from OUC shouldn't cause us to spike this up again in October. Does that answer the question? Or?
Yes, that the quarterly thing or the 4-month multiplier helped a lot. But and you mentioned the transactional attorneys being under budget, but we now have got this new attorney, and I don't know how that's gonna offset that. I understand he's cheaper, but call me a cynic when he was up here telling about all the things he was going to do. I heard ka-ching, ka-ching, ka-ching. So yeah, I just wanted to raise those questions. Hope it all works out. Thanks.
All right, thank you. And I think it's, we did we worked hard, and I personally didn't work hard, but Cindy, you worked hard and doing the analysis to save the cash flow and making the presentation. We paid off that debt. I think it's unfortunate that now all that is well, that's going to mitigate some of our cost increase next year, so we're not going to actually see some benefit from that. But we do, because we got the benefit of not having to raise the rates because our capacity charge goes up.
And one more thing, if I could, Mr. Chairman, along those lines, we have a future agenda item coming up with the Finance Commission where we are going to do, the staff is in the process of doing an analysis of the suggestions that Mr. Gorey came up with. I think they were discussed during your joint meeting not too long ago. And we're hopeful that some of those will actually result in some potential cost decreases for next year as well. That's going to be a huge part of our budget cycle. So once we've prepared that analysis and we have that meeting with the Finance Commission, it's our intention to bring that discussion to the Utility Commission as well and talk about some of the other things we might be able to do in the coming fiscal year to bring some costs down.
Well, that's good, because that was going to be the one question I had for Jim. You under my matters was, where you are with the SWOT analysis that we're doing.
We have accomplished most of those and putting the SWOT to those. But myself and Tom are still talking about some issues, for example, at the power plant, things that we can do and try to reduce some of our exposure and costs there. We got to sort of put it in perspective. One of the things we just did is they sold the oil out of that one of those tanks, which we kept the tank empty. So that really has eliminated and started the process of taking the power plant out of service, because I think no matter if we sell or don't sell, we've got to have that as one of our goals, since it has also been noted as an expenditure that we don't really need if we can buy capacity on the market at a much better price, which we think we can.
Okay.
Jim, while you're standing there, I think it's important for a lot of reasons that since you've made this recommendation, we've concurred, but given the recent past history of some changes on an intermittent basis and a somewhat frequent basis, I think it's really critical that this recommendation and this action prevail throughout this fiscal year. I think it doesn't do anybody any good. You got some administrative costs, I assume, some processing costs. I don't know what they would be, but to make these changes, and I just think that in terms of the public perception, this is very welcome, but let's make sure that it sticks.
And we're going to try our best to do that, because we are trying to reduce our costs where we do have some expenditures we're going to have to do. For example, we have 2 substations that we're going to have to do some switching modifications, and they represent about $500,000 apiece. We're hoping to put those over a couple of fiscal years so the impact wouldn't be immediate and you don't have to do all the work at one time. So we have a few of those projects that really primarily are in the T&D. We have to obviously maintain units 2 and 5 in order to make sure we meet our contract obligations with Florida Power and Light. Unit 3, on the other hand, just to give you an update on that, Tom and I have been talking about it. It probably will be the next unit that will probably take offline, because it's starting to get up and expensive of maintenance, and eventually it's going to exceed the cost is going to exceed what our benefits to that, and it's not under the contract with OUC, so we're not doing any major improvements to it now. But if a couple more of those, what are those lines, Tom, that water tubes, he brought one to my office and showed me what happens when one of those things blow up. And then you can take, for the capacity of plants, you can seal off the top and the bottom of that, but you can only do so many of those, and eventually it becomes where it's inoperable. So we're sort of gearing ourselves toward that.
Okay. Particularly with the SWOT analysis that have to do with the operation of the utility, those are the ones that we'd be the most interested in. And of course, that does include operation of the utility, and does include the cash reserve. So we need to make sure we maintain that. So those are the things that we're looking forward to hearing and maybe we'll have some of that in June, possibly.
Probably late June by the term of the schedule, so that the Finance Commission can discuss it. It's probably going to be the late June timeframe before they pull another meeting together. So July.
Okay, well, we don't have to necessarily wait on them. I mean,
Well, we're really doing it for them because they're the ones that initiated the analysis and gave the question. So I think we owe it to the Finance Commission to sort of take it to them first. And
I thought it was a joint meeting.
but they came out with the questions. No, I understand, but it will make it sequential where it's going to be very, very close. You know, something else, let's don't lose sight of the fact when we talk about the additional capacity, the fact of the matter is we're selling those kilowatts and megawatts. So hopefully we get up to that capacity they are projecting for us, because in terms of sales, that obviously means revenue. And so if we can get to those numbers, then our revenues are going to increase and it offsets these costs. And so it's capacity is not all bad if you've got the market for it.
You know, you just were beginning to allude to some potential issues here in cost in the 2015, maybe 2016, I don't know. Will all of those be built into the budget for the next fiscal year and beyond, so that we have some reliable forecast of what the real world may look like in the sad event that the utility is not sold?
Yes, sir. That's our game right now, is that we are going to put some real numbers on there. We tried to do it in a short state, and I think no matter if the sale goes through or otherwise, we owe it to ourselves to project out. And if it closes 2 years from now or 3 years from now or 5 years from now, the real numbers are going to be critical to us, because we're coming to the reality that for at least the next couple of years, we'll probably be setting rates.
One of the things that we did starting a couple of years ago with our capital budgets, though, and I think you remember this, is we started taking into account the residual balances forward, and we did a 5-year capital plan that smoothed out the transfers from the operating side. It used to be if we spent 7 one year, it was 7. If we spent 2, it was 2, and up and down. So what we've done for the current 5-year CIP is a pretty steady transfer of about $3.4 to $3 million. And so in our preliminary look, I think Tom and Ted and I think that within that $3.5 million a year that we've programmed all along, we can fit these projects in and make it work. So again, our goal is not to have that number vary dramatically and impact the rates.
But we'll have a chance to see the analysis and the projected results.
And the 5-year CIP, because we will take Council's first set of budget workshops is July the 7th through the 11th, and that 5-year CIP forecast will be part of that. And then between July and September at the budget adoption, we'll take those budgets to the various commissions and discuss them before the adoption, so in conjunction with the SWAT.
Mark? Yeah.
One last real quick thing, I hope, that I was just reminded of. I've been meaning to ask this to Jim, but I figured now that I just remembered it, I'd do it in front of God and everybody. I thought last month's meeting was very interesting. Tom Richards' presentation on the capacity charges and the magnitude of those things, and I kind of got from that, although I don't believe it was stated, that it may cost us more to decommission the plant than it would to continue as we're doing today. And I just wanted to ask that question, whether that's a proper concept or not.
The answer to the question is decommissioning is going to have a cost to it, and we're going to have to buy capacity. So initially there will be a higher cost associated with taking that and decommissioning it, or actually putting that into mothball, because decommissioning means that you'll ultimately take the plant down, and we may do that in the future, but initially we don't plan to do that. We would leave our substation attached to that site, because that's another inborn cost. You can use the analogy, it's sort of like going from a defined benefit to a defined contribution. pension plan, which we're going to hopefully do next year. When that occurs, you have the initial cost of freezing the plan and then the plan going forward, but you reduce your future risk. And that's what taking that plan out of service, in our opinion, is going to reduce our future risk or future cost. But there is going to be an initial expenditure.
Have you quantified that?
Not yet, because we're going to have to get a better handle on, for example, what our transmission improvements are going to require as a cost, and then get an idea of what the market value of capacity that we're going to have to purchase, and then taking the plant, obviously, and there's going to have to be some security of the plant and this kind of thing over time. So and hopefully we'll do that and phase it in. You won't go down there one day and the plant's running and the next day it's turned off. It will be phasing that process.
Okay. Anything else to come before the commission today? Okay. Take them.
Are we down to members' matters? Or?
The next meeting would be the second Tuesday of June. Okay.
I've got one thing. I'd like to see us, maybe not this time, but next or so on, adopt the same rules for the general public comments as the city council has, which is to limit the time a little bit and have them all come up front and not as many comments coming throughout the meeting, which would streamline the meeting process quite a bit. On bad days, today would not have made much difference. But
all right. Well, we basically do, I believe, follow the rules the city council does. And the way we've done it here, though, specifically, we have a time of public comment. And at that point in time, the public can come up and raise any issues they want. Once that public comment's closed, then I welcome the public to make comments relative to the agenda item, to the things that we're discussing. And if they come up and ask questions, hopefully we can deal with it, work with it. I've done very good at keeping these meetings to less than 2 hours. But if you'd like, certainly bring this up on your, I see you, Jim, we'll get to that, but bring it up on your, let Sherry know, and we can discuss this and see if we need to make a policy change next month. Yes, Jim.
Just for clarification on the city council, you do have the public comment, but by a change in state law, the city attorney has advised before any action is taken by the city council on any item on the agenda, the public has the right to address that item. So, and that even goes, for example, our consent agenda, the public has the right to come up and address issues on the consent agenda before the council takes a vote. So
that's very welcome news. And Scott, I hope that we do not make any changes in terms of the way we've operated for the last 3 years that I've been involved. I think you've done an excellent job, and you've given the public an opportunity to make comments and that have been helpful and useful to all of us.
Thank you.
I would also like to second that, as having been on this committee for quite some years. I think that the way we've been operating is within the standards, and I would hate to see us make changes like that, because we are an informational generating arm of the city council, and I thought we welcomed people coming up and talking to us and asking questions. So I hope we remain so.
Well, I did not mean to change the idea of people being welcome to come up and make comments, but more to organize it a little better than it's been at some meetings. Like I say, this meeting would not be.
Well, our first organizational meeting was a little difficult. There was some confusion as to the mandate for that meeting, and but we did get that clarified as that went on. But generally, I don't think we've had a problem. We're glad to discuss this next month in greater detail, and we'll always try to let the public speak before we take an action. I guess today I did it after we did, but going forward, I'll try to do better with that. All right, seeing we have a motion to adjourn. Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Meeting is adjourned.